Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. McLaren brought upgrades this weekend to Max Verstappen's backyard and delivered the most dominant victory of the entire season so far, despite Lando Norris again having problems on lap 1. Max Verstappen's car, however, brought back the Bahrain spec flaw as Red Bull are searching for answers, and clearly it still hasn't worked out. Max seems, after this Grand Prix, genuinely concerned this driver's championship is not yet over, especially if McLaren can start to put together some more 1-2 finishes. Very much intriguing your thoughts on what was a fascinating race today, albeit not the most dramatic, but certainly so many storylines. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Before we get into it, various things today, certainly from Williams. Yesterday, you guys might remember, Alex Albon was disqualified. We didn't get to talk about it in yesterday's video because it happened too late. His floor was too wide. Now, basically they brought upgraded floors, didn't they? And it seemed to work. Like, the Williams was actually surprisingly okay this weekend. But the problem was for them is that their floor was not legal based on the specifications. And James Vowles was like, hang on, I thought we checked our floor. Surely it was okay. So, you know, they've got to figure a few things out where they go from here. I think they were able to actually revise the floor so that it does kind of, well, fit within the rules, shall we say. But that meant Alex Albon did not start from P8 like he was meant to, and as a result, did not get the points finish they were looking for. Both of them raced okay today, but, you know, no points to speak of. One of the big dramas, though, of yesterday was around Logan Sargeant. I even talked about this yesterday, right? Sargeant crashes again yesterday. It's a tough time to crash for Sargeant because it's a brand new upgrade, and not even before you get to a competitive session, he puts two wheels on the grass and sticks it in the wall, destroying the car in many ways. And apparently the patience might be running out, like it might have already run out. So there's rumours that Sargeant may be replaced by Monza. Now look, we often hear things about this and it's relatively rare that they actually execute on it. Look, I know that Sargeant's been getting defended by many, and I get that perspective. I tend to align more closely with how Formula 1 used to be, where the teams were absolutely ruthless. Like, you'd get a drive for 3 races, you'd get kicked out 3 races before the end of the season, then have 4 or 5 drivers in the car during the course of a season. Like, that's kind of how it used to be, and if you weren't performing, if you weren't up to the level, you were getting fired. That's how it typically has been, and I think it might be about time, personally, for Williams to do that. They've got other options here, right? What's the point keeping Sargeant around? It actually may even be beneficial if they just get rid of him, because it gives him time to prepare what his next steps are, because he's not getting another Formula 1 drive. So, you know, he'd have some time to prepare to go to another racing series or whatever the case might be. And he got a pretty hard photo of him stepping out of the car yesterday. So there was that. The other options for Williams, Antonelli is an interesting one. We're pretty sure that he's getting confirmed as Mercedes driver replacing Hamilton next year at Monza. So, assuming that happens, maybe they say, look, go and drive the Williams for a few rounds, get a bit of F1 experience, then debut in the Mercedes next year. Or, potentially, Red Bull might look to loan out Lawson. That, to me, makes a bit of sense, honestly. It seems like Lawson is going to get a drive at RB next season. So if you can loan him out for the rest of the year while you figure out the whole Ricardo Perez thing, that might make sense, but they've not made any decisions. The actual favourite, according to AMUS, to get the drive would be Mick Schumacher. Now, I like Mick. I think he's a great guy. My question is, if you're looking for a replacement for Sargeant so you don't crash as much, is Mick the guy? Like, you know, no disrespect, but we know that Mick Schumacher had his fair share of shots in the wall when he was at Haas. So I'm not necessarily so convinced that, you know, they would make this happen, but apparently that's the favourite to potentially make that go through. Now let's dive into the race. We're going to talk about, as the race goes on here and we kind of go through it, exactly what Red Bull were up to this weekend, changing around parts on their car and stuff like this. There was some drama as well, because Magnussen changed some parts on his engine and started from the pit lane. And obviously Alex Albon was then disqualified. So there was a question as to where Hamilton would start. He did get the 3-place penalty, controversially so, for that impeding on Perez yesterday. So you'd have thought he was going to be 15th. But then Albon got dropped down, as did Magnussen. So you'd have thought Hamilton would have been like 13th. But no, they applied the penalties in a weird order, to be honest, and he ended up starting 14th. So there was some strange debate on that. Didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, though. This weekend, of course, was Max Verstappen's 200th Grand Prix, and he scored another podium, but it was not the victory that he would have liked in front of his home crowd, and it's now, what, 5 races in a row where Max Verstappen has not won? Which just seems impossible to think about where this car was not long ago. And look, I've got some things to say today on the state of this Red Bull right now. We'll get into it over the coming minutes. But as absolutely expected, Lando bottled it off the line. Like, you know, the car was so good today that it didn't matter. And had Lando led off the line, I mean, he'd have won by 30 seconds. Like, we're talking an absurd level of performance advantage today. But again, Lando bogs down a bit, gets some wheel spin. I'm not sure whether at this point we can attribute some of that to the McLaren, just because Piastri also got a poor start here, and even Charles Leclerc nearly made up even more places than he did, because Piastri got a bad launch as well. Lando got a lot of wheel spin off the start. It's something they're going to have to look at, I think, with the clutch. But still, Lando Norris, like, part of it's on him, isn't it, really? Like, at this point, he just does love bottling it from lap 1, and that was the picture that I showed you at the start of the video. People were quote-tweeting this yesterday and saying, oh, Lando, what lap are you going to lose the lead on tomorrow? Or what turn are you going to lose the lead on tomorrow? Like, I know people that put money on Verstappen leading lap 1, and I feel like that was free cash, to be honest. Like, obviously, Verstappen knew that he did not have the fastest car today, so he was always going to be sending it into turn 1, and we know that Lando can often get bogged down on starts. In Spain, this cost him the race win. In Budapest, this cost him the race win. And had he won those 2 races with better starts, then the championship would be looking very different indeed. It nearly, well, it could have cost him the race win today, but it turns out the McLaren is so good that it simply didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But again, you've got to say from Lando's perspective, this is now his, 7th time of starting a race, either a sprint or a Grand Prix from pole, and not leading out of lap 1. Like, surely eventually he's going to be able to convert it. But, you know, if Lando had a bit more of that, like, dog within, if you want to describe it as that, like, that kind of mentality and bottle that, you know, the Verstappens, the Hamiltons of the grid have, Lando would probably be winning this World Championship, or at least right there in the conversation and be the favourite to win. He's still nowhere near the favourite to win, but he is the favourite to win basically every race from now on, based on the way that car is currently looking, right? So, yeah, okay, 0-6, my bad, 0-6 for converting P1 on the opening lap of Formula 1, and, you know, as the race then gets underway, Norris slots into 2nd place. We know that it's difficult to overtake around here. They did thankfully fix the track by adding DRS to the banking. It was atrocious before that, but at least it does give opportunities. It's not the best track in Formula 1. It's a cool quali track. It's kind of unique, but I don't massively like it. But Lando was dropping back 1.5 seconds behind. Hamilton started on the soft tyres, got up to 12th initially, got past a couple of guys, and then started to make some progress through the field, of course. But Russell also got Piastri, and that was another pretty crucial moment as well for Oscar to drop back as he did. I think Piastri would have felt like, you know what, getting into the lead maybe would have been a possibility at this point. Leclerc also with a good start to jump Perez. That was crucial for his race as time went on. But Lando was, you know, within 1.5 seconds. I always felt like Lando had more pace. If you ever see a driver lapping within like 2 seconds of the car in front consistently, they probably have more pace in the car in front. It's just they're in the dirty air. It's difficult to make the move happen. So this gap maintained for some time, and it's not like Verstappen was driving away as he, you know, would have done this time last season, for example, if it was a similar circumstance. Norris then was asked a very interesting question on the radio, and I've got to say, McLaren, and especially Lando Norris as race engineer, they still don't strike me as a championship team. Like, they're probably going to win the Constructors this year, but I don't understand this message. Hey Lando, who are we racing? Do you think it's just Max? If I'm Lando, I'm like, hang on a second, you're meant to tell me who I'm racing. I've got to drive this thing. You can see all the data. You tell me. Yeah, are we in a fight with Max? Who's the guy behind me? How far is he behind me? Like, I'm not meant to know these things. So I'm still just confused why this message was even said. And Lando's like, we're racing the car ahead, are we not? Like, we're trying to fight for the race win out here. So, yeah, McLaren still strike me as a strange team. Like, from an operational perspective, they don't seem to have quite got used to the fact yet that they are actually, like, the best car in Formula 1, and they need to, basically execute as such. Even their strategy today with Piastri, I thought was a bit questionable. We'll get into that in a second. Strategy is generally easier when you've got the fastest car. We've seen that with Mercedes, we've seen that with Red Bull over the last few years, and now I think to some extent we're seeing it with McLaren. But yeah, this is lap 9. Norris and Verstappen were kind of doing battle, but it was pretty clear that by lap 14 Norris was going to be able to at least challenge to make this move at some point, and it wasn't that many laps later. That's exactly what he did. Hamilton was making progress in the field as one of the soft tyres. kind of a confusing day for Mercedes because Hamilton's run on the soft tyres at the start was pretty good. He was able to go really long on the softs, surprising many. But actually, the Mercedes tyre deck, certainly for Russell, was pretty awful. And they ended up having to two-stop both drivers. They probably didn't need to two-stop Hamilton, to be fair, but that's what they decided to do in the end. But this was, I think, on lap 18, Lando Norris getting back into the lead over Max Verstappen. Max held off well, but it was quite clear that in terms of tyre degradation, which is really the key factor when it comes to situations like this, Lando's car was just in a much better spot. Max was struggling to make the thing turn, and Lando just got past, got the move done into turn, basically at the end of turn 1 into turn 2, and that was it. He effectively just sailed off into the distance. Max was able to stay within DRS for a couple of laps, but as you guys can see here, Leclerc was behind Piastri putting pressure on Russell, and Hamilton was up into 9th and eventually got into 8th, and at that point you've got the top 8 cars in the top 8 positions. Not much was going to change at that point. So Norris, after getting the lead on the radio, he was like, yeah, the tyres are pretty good. We might try plan A. Even this, it was like, yeah, Max might try and undercut us, but that's fine. So again, it's like strange kind of word to McLaren. It's like, okay, is it fine? Like, are we going to allow Max to undercut us? No problem. Turns out that by the time this message had come through, Lando was just pulling a gap. So, Max really had no hope to try the undercut because it wasn't going to do anything. And as we can see by lap 24, the gap was 3.4 seconds and only growing from there. Russell's first stint was pretty good. I mean, he was holding on to Verstappen, holding on to Norris, holding Piastri and Leclerc behind. I think this will annoy Piastri in many ways. Today should have been, really, a 1-2 for McLaren, right? Piastri, had he got a better start, stayed ahead of Russell, it quite possibly would have been, or should have been, or at least he would have been on the podium, challenging Verstappen for P2, which you'd have thought he might have found a way to get. And that's why when people said, certainly around Hungary, that, oh yeah, Piastri, he's now a match for Norris or whatever, Piastri's still got a ways to go in terms of his tyre deg, in terms of just, overall consistency and pace. Norris is one of the best drivers on the grid. In terms of raw pace, Norris is right up there and is able to maximise the car most of the time on a Saturday and a Sunday. Yes, Norris has his weaknesses, he has his flaws, and he's been very hard on himself over those things over the course of this season so far, but Max is on the radio saying the car doesn't turn, it doesn't respond to the inputs, it won't go around corners properly, and we'll get onto a bit more discussion on that in a second. So as the race continues, I mean, at this point, Norris was just driving away. There were a few other things that were going on. Verstappen then pitted, Norris then pitted to cover it, had a sizable advantage, and then just completely disappeared off into the distance, right? At this point, though, Piastri had pit later on with the intention to make some serious moves. Get past Perez, get past Russell, and then I think maybe he came out ahead of Perez, but get past Russell, get ahead of Leclerc, and then potentially challenge Max for second place. And he had the pace to do it initially, and Norris was just completely destroying Verstappen, so you'd have thought Piastri might have been able to get the job done, but Leclerc is just so good. And also the Ferrari today was better than we thought. I mean, the fact that the Ferrari today was better than the Mercedes, that was a bit of a surprise, and that will actually please Ferrari quite a lot. They were able to put together a car that again was capable of getting a podium, mainly because Charles Leclerc is a wizard, but partly because the car was actually all right. Even Sainz overtaking Perez at the end was pretty impressive. But this was the big talking point actually going into today on the floor spec that Max Verstappen was using. Effectively, Red Bull have gone full Aston Martin, right? You guys remember last year when Aston Martin brought upgrades that didn't work, and therefore they were just trying everything on the car, old spec, new spec, trying to understand what's been going on. And this weekend, they put Max to the Bahrain floor spec, right? Literally the one they were using at the start of the season to try and make the car more predictable, better balance, maybe slower, but better balance, and more appealing to the drivers. And, well, guess what? It's clearly not worked, has it, right? So they put this old spec on the car, what they were using at the start of the year, and the gap that they had at the start of the year has not only been overturned, but it's literally been copied now by McLaren, at least on this Grand Prix, and we'll see some evidence of that in a second. This was kind of wild, by the way. Alex Albon, I think, was complaining about the fact that Kevin Magnussen was effectively trying to hold up the entire pack here to allow Hulkenberg to escape, which he did. And then it got overtaken by 4 cars in one corner, which was quite the moment, an Indy 500-esque moment, really. Charles was on the radio to Brian Bozzi, his engineer, and saying, stop telling me about turn 10. the car's terrible there, whatever I do. But wow, what a drive today for Leclerc. I really wanted to give him so much praise for what he was capable of today. Holding Piastri back, I thought, was an absolute masterclass in defensive driving, holding him just outside of DRS, maintaining the tyres as necessary, getting a good move early on. Like, Leclerc, to me, should have been driver of the day, absolutely hands down today. And I was just so impressed by his performance, to be honest, right? This is why, you know, I get some flack for this sometimes when I say, look, Sainz, he's a good driver, maybe a very good driver, but Charles Leclerc is a great driver, an excellent driver, one of the absolute best on the grid. And today and last time out in Spa were sparkling examples of exactly that. Leclerc was on the pace of Norris for some time. He was on the pace of Verstappen, potentially catching Verstappen towards the end of the Grand Prix, which he actually did. So, you know, who knows how many more laps Leclerc potentially could have been in the conversation for even overtaking Max. Probably there was never the delta though. But look, the race was about to come to an end, and let's have a look at this. These are the race winning margins this season. The start of the year, the race was won in Bahrain by 22.5 seconds by Max Verstappen, 13.6. Then obviously Australia, Max DNF'd. Then it was Japan. Then it was China. Similar story in terms of the overall winning margin. Then things changed. Whatever happens between then and Miami and then in Imola, the race victory margins have decreased substantially over the last few rounds, where every single round has been monumentally competitive. This weekend, McLaren brought upgrades and they won this race by 22.8 seconds, a larger advantage than Max won in Bahrain by. Piastri couldn't get the movement in the end on Leclerc. Hamilton and Russell both pitted for soft tyres. The Russell decision was interesting because he was ahead of Sainz and Perez, but I guess Mercedes didn't think he could hold them off. They pitted him, but he just didn't have the pace to even get close to making the overtake again. Actually, Hamilton looked more likely to get Russell than Russell get Perez, and Hamilton, though, at this point had the fastest lap. He was pretty sure he might hold on to it, but that's not what happened as the race continues. And as you can see here, even Leclerc was putting a gap on Verstappen at this point, so yeah, super impressive from Charles Leclerc. This was pretty funny from Mercedes. Bono was telling Hamilton on the radio, like, hey, don't worry about the fastest lap. We're pretty sure we've got it. No one's going to take it from us at this point because no one's pitted for soft and whatever. Turns out that McLaren is an absolute rocket ship, and Norris was able, on like 50-lap-old hard tyres, to deliver the fastest lap on the final lap with a 13.8, basically half a tenth ahead of Hamilton, to get another World Championship point, which who knows how critical that could be down the line. Alonso eventually got Hülkenberg, so Magnussen's efforts were not rewarded in the end. This is the question that again is coming to my head. How is it possible that Norris was 48.5 seconds behind Max in round one, and now he's just absolutely destroyed him at his home track this weekend? Obviously, McLaren have made massive progress with their car. They brought a big upgrade to Miami. They've had another big upgrade this weekend. But you cannot convince me that's the same Red Bull. Like, they put the old Bahrain spec floor on it this weekend, and like, it can't be the same car. Like, you cannot convince me. The physics don't add up in my head. Like, there's no way it's possible that it's the same car at the start of the season and somehow everyone has improved and McLaren have made the most in-season progression of all time to somehow turn this around. Now, sure, maybe from a setup POV, Red Bull didn't exactly perfect it this weekend, but even hearing Max, what he talks about, the car doesn't respond to the inputs, looking at his POV through the corners, struggling to get the car to turn around turn 10, like, so many issues. Like, that Red Bull has so clearly regressed in my mind, and whether it's regressed due to the whole asymmetric braking thing, that's another question, and we've talked about that over the last several days. But this is the debate now. Is the championship fight legitimately on? Piastri could have got P2 today, probably should have got P2, but if it remains true that McLaren continue this sizable of an advantage over the coming rounds, they absolutely will be and should be starting to deliver more 1-2 finishes with, ideally for them, Norris P1, Piastri P2 in terms of trying to fight for both championships, because the Constructors is, I wouldn't say it's over, but they're 30 points down and they are absolutely the favourites to go on and win that championship. In the drivers, the gap is 70 points. So 70 points over 9 rounds. If Norris was to gain 8 points per round, that's 72 points, right? But there are also a couple of sprint races in there, so that's potentially more points on the table to potentially kind of hoover up as well. A couple more fastest laps. You know, it's definitely possible, right? Norris would have to win and Verstappen would have to be P2 every round, and if that was to happen, he would gain 7 points every round. But if he does it in the sprints as well, he's basically going to be there or thereabouts for the championship. So, theoretically, Norris has just got to win every race, and he's got to just have Piastri get, 1 or 2 seconds, and that's the championship one. Far easier said than done, especially because this is Norris's second ever win, and, he's obviously still got weaknesses and flaws about his overall performance weekend to weekends, but its pace is absolutely unquestionable. So Max is going to be nervous about this, and Red Bull are nervous about this as well. Helmut Marko says, yeah, we've got upgrades in the pipeline, but Norris absolutely has the speed to catch Max in the championship. We've got to find something. That McLaren is very fast, and as far as they're concerned, it's absolutely not over in terms of Max winning this championship. Even Horner says, damage limitation. We've got to understand what the deficit is. We feel like we've learned where it is, but it's one thing knowing where you're weaker. It's another thing actually fixing it. Obviously, he says, in the Constructors' Championship, a big chunk of points again. We believe we've got the confidence or the strength and depth to respond. But, as I say, much easier said than done on this occasion. Even Lando Norris, like he was going to turn the screw, wasn't he? He was on the radio after winning saying simply lovely, Max's catchphrase, which I thought was pretty funny. Obviously, those two guys are friends, but it's only friends for so long when you're in a World Drivers' Championship in Formula 1 battle. And then he says, yeah, I thought Max would be faster. He was actually dropping back to the Ferrari. That's what Lando said, while his car was an absolute rocket. So, massively impressive performance, and, it does make the season exciting. Like, it's great to have close races where the winner is a close battle, but also today kind of tells me that the rest of the season, like the championships are not necessarily over yet. I just wonder when we get to Abu Dhabi in a few races' time, whether McLaren are going to look back at what happened in Budapest, where they obviously got Piastri and Norris to swap places, and that potentially could change, that could be a crucial 7 points when it comes to who won the championship at the end of the season in terms of the drivers as well. And, who knows if that decision might cost them both championships, but long way to go. On the Mercedes side, they made changes overnight going into the Saturday. Hamilton said this, that their car was pretty good Friday, but it had a bit of understeer. They wanted to dial the understeer out, and they just made their car substantially worse on the Saturday, and that's why Hamilton was like, yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons why he didn't qualify well yesterday, and then today the car just wasn't so good. So, obviously they eventually both two-stopped, and they go from finishing first and second on the road in Spa to finishing 7th and 8th on the road here. So clearly there's still something that Mercedes are missing about this car, but, I still feel like they'll be back stronger in the upcoming weekends. Even Max was talking about his problems in the car and says that I'm not surprised with how I was feeling with the kind of performance, with how I was feeling in the car. Everything I was trying to do didn't translate. When I steer left, the car is not turning left immediately how I wanted it to, potentially how it did at the start of the season. So he says, very complicated to understand why and how we can fix that. So, obviously it's not like they've got a solution ready to go, which raises the question of whether they actually can fix it by the time it actually matters. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Fascinating weekend. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.